So here we are at the HBI 2022 conference, and I'm joined by Dr. Helmut Schuehsler, who is the chairman and CEO of TVM Capital Healthcare, investing in healthcare in markets around the world, Middle East, North Africa, Southeast Asia. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, I understand that you've recently exited 3 of your 5 investments in the Middle East, and you're now looking at fundraising. So what's all that about? What are you targeting? What are your objectives there?
Yeah, well, we established TVM Capital Healthcare about, 12 years ago. And our business model in Dubai when we got started was actually a combination of being a classical investor, like a private equity firm or a venture capitalist, and an operator. So what we did was we looked at the healthcare market around us in the United Arab Emirates, in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia, and other countries. And we tried to find out what was actually missing in the care system. And our first answer was that what was really missing is what is a very big business in Europe and in the US, which is long-term care, post-acute care, and rehabilitation. And these types of facilities and services simply didn't exist in the GCC countries or in other Arab countries in North Africa. So we started out to conceptualize that type of business. We spoke with the regulators, with the Ministry of Health. We tried to make them establish regulation for it, establish tariffs, reimbursement rates, etc. So it was a process. But we got it done, and then we started putting a syndicate of investors together and find management, and then we started that business. And in the last 10 years, that whole field of post-acute care and long-term care has become a big business in the UAE. And so we did that very successfully, and we built 3 companies in the field with different focus areas. So one was focused entirely on ventilated care. Another one was a very broad-based rehab, long-term care, post-acute care place, including ventilated. And then we built a home care company that is working in classical home care, but also working on PSP programs with the pharmaceutical industry. And so it's been a very interesting journey where I think we learned a lot in the process, but we also contributed a lot to care in our target markets. Yeah, we sold our companies to partly strategics and partly investors. And we're now moving forward by raising a new fund and starting our next group of companies or investing in existing companies, depending on what we find.
And so where do you see the best opportunities? Which markets, which sectors are you targeting?
The markets in the Middle East, I think, are now, at least the way we see it is we will have a focus on the GCC countries. So we will continue to have that focus, let me say, but within that, Saudi Arabia has become much more important for us because Saudi has made a strong commitment to privatize healthcare and has established, as you know, the Vision 2030, that is designed to transform the Saudi economy from almost exclusively based on oil and gas to a much more diverse economic and commercial base. So healthcare is part of that. It's a hugely important infrastructure element. And so the Saudi government has invited people to invest in private healthcare, and that's what we're going to do. It is the biggest country in that part of the world. And we think that in this transformation process, we can play a very important role. In Southeast Asia, the main focus will be on countries around Singapore, on those countries that have grown very fast in the last 20, 25 years. Countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, of course, maybe the Philippines, Thailand, and Malaysia. These are very populous countries. They are much larger than the Middle Eastern countries. But of course, they have different price points and different ways of paying. It's very interesting because in that part of the world, healthcare is not generally paid by governments or by private insurance even. People pay for their own healthcare out of pocket, which creates different pressures. It's a different kind of a business
One of the issues that's very high on the agenda for stakeholders and investors in many countries. Here in the UK, we hear a lot about ESG, the environmental, social and governance issues that have to be looked at for any area where you're investing. And it's impacting a lot of companies as to how they invest, where they invest, what they target, sustainable TVM, Capital Healthcare. On your website, you talk about sustainable healthcare investment. So how do you make it sustainable? How do you take account of those factors?
Yeah, ESG, of course, is a very rapidly evolving field. And we started doing what we did in the Middle East in 2010, and the IFC was an investor of ours, still is. And the IFC started with putting out performance standards, the IFC performance standards, which was an early incarnation of what we call ESG today. And so we have over the years implemented the IFC performance standards and then developed our own version of it by actually intensifying the work, because we always found, even back in 2012, 13, 14, when ESG wasn't the kind of big topic that it is today in the investment world, we found that it actually adds value to look at companies from a governance perspective, from an environmental perspective, and especially in our part of the world, a social perspective. How you treat your employees, your people, how you treat your suppliers, your creditors, how you interact with the regulators and the patients, the patient families, that you design a patient journey which is high quality. And so all of that for us was a kind of a 10-year process in the meanwhile. And in a funny way, now the world has kind of caught up with us. And while in the past we didn't talk much about it, we just did it. Nowadays, you can talk to investors, limited partners like pension funds and insurance companies and sovereign wealth funds without actually having a focus on what you do in ESG. This is where the world is going at the moment. And
you were ahead of the curve.
We are actually, we don't have to catch up. We are, I think, pretty much at the forefront of what's going on. And so we've tried to keep an open eye on it. But we also firmly believe, now that we've sold most of the initial companies we invested in and we built, that the buyers, who are usually very large organizations, either hospital systems or publicly listed entities, they themselves are under a lot of pressure to focus on ESG. They have to report on it. And if they acquire companies, they obviously have a lot of focus on that part. And so what you do is one thing, but how you report on it and how you demonstrate that you're doing it is becoming a more and more important aspect.
That's been really interesting to hear about your investment priorities. Helmut Schuehsler of TVM Capital Healthcare, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.